Hi, my name is Warren North and welcome back to Tennis Backwards. So in the previous two chapters we looked at the ball, the racket and the arm and the properties of each, and then we also looked at some scientific theories which control things like ball flight and the bounce of the ball. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put those together and we're going to develop tennis strokes from a scientific basis, so from a proven, rational, scientific principles, if you like. And we're going to start with the most important shot in tennis these days, which is the topspin forehand. But before we do that, let's just maybe recap and just think about the question, why hit with spin at all? I mean, sure, the pros do it, but if I'm a club player or if I'm new to the game, is it of any benefit? I think the answer to that is emphatically yes, because spinning the ball enables us to control it. And I mean, it's quite easy to hit a topspin forehand with moderate spin. I mean, we don't all have to be Raffers, and it will just give a huge improvement in that shot. And slice, I mean, hitting with slice, hitting a backhand slice, in my opinion, well, I think it's easier than hitting a flat ball. And as we'll see later on when we get to that particular shot, it gives us all sorts of shot options. So, the topspin forehand. What are we trying to do when we hit a good topspin forehand? We're trying to do two things. We're trying to hit the ball hard, yet get it to land inside the court. So if you think about that first thing, hitting the ball hard, that's actually pretty easy to do. I mean, especially with modern tennis rackets. But we're not playing baseball here. I mean, you don't get any points for hitting the ball out of the park. So that's where we get to this second bit, which is making it land in the court, which means we need to control the ball. And the way you control it is you hit it with topspin, which means we then have the aerodynamic effect acting upon the ball, which puts a downward force on the ball and effectively makes it land within the court. So let's look at that in more detail. So we studied the ball and we identified that it had four properties. So it's got speed and direction twice for both translation or travel and spin. So what we need to do is we need to focus on the speed. We need to hit the ball with high speed, both speeds, so both translational and spin speed, or high combined speed, if you like. The point is here, there's no point in hitting with one and not the other. So how do we do that? We need to move on to the racket. So if you remember, the racket had four properties, each one of those aligning with a ball property. So we're focusing on the two ball properties, the two speed properties of the ball. So the racket properties that correspond with that, we want high translational ball speed. That means we want high racket speed in that direction. And we want high ball spin speed, which means we want high racket head speed in that direction. Or if you combine the two, we're looking at racket head speed in that direction. Now let's look at the arm. So if you remember from when we looked at it before, it's all about the three joints. So the wrist, the elbow and the shoulder, and how they have different degrees of movement. So there's 1, 2, 3, that's a total of 6, but then we combined the rotation function of the elbow and shoulder, so that in effect gave us 5. So what we need to do is look at how those 5 functions or degrees of movement of the arm can combine such that it swings the racket in such a way to give us those high ball speeds that we're after. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to start with a really simple swing, and then bit by bit we're going to add parts to it so that we can see what happens and analyze it as well. So let's start with a really simple swing. So as you can see there, I'm just swinging from my shoulder. So I'm swinging up, I'm swinging across, and I'm putting it together. I'm swinging like that at a fixed angle. And as you can also see, I've locked my elbow and I've locked my wrist. So now let's unlock the elbow. Putting it together, there's our simple swing. And I can just hear, you can just hear the racket through the air. You can hear that I've added a lot of racketed speed just by unlocking my elbow. So now let's unlock the wrist. So the wrist at the start of the swing, at your backswing, is cocked, and then it straightens. So there's your simple swing, add the wrist in, and then add the elbow in. So that might look like a reasonably good swing, but remember, we've still got one function of the arm to go, and that is rotation. Now you might say, well, what's that all about? I mean, there's not a heck of a lot going on there, but if I cock my wrist and then if I cock my elbow, you can see I can generate a lot of racket head speed through rotation. And the other thing about rotation too is it's just so easy. Like, I can rotate my arm there in just a fraction of a second, whereas to swing like that, it takes about a full second and a lot more energy. So let's now add that in. So there's the simple swing, there's the elbow, there's the wrist, and there's rotation. Now we need to add the body into the mix. So if you remember when we looked at it, it has 6 potential degrees of freedom, but we're really only interested in 2, which is movement or translation along the z-axis and rotation about the y-axis. So if we think of that first one, the movement, the z-axis is the axis that's towards your opponent. So if I rotate that and just my opponent's now that way, and if I hold everything else still except that, you can see so you're stepping into the shot. Now if you can see, that is not adding a heck of a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of speed in my racket there. It's probably something like about, I don't know, half a meter or a foot a second. So in terms of what we're trying to look at, it's insignificant really. So I think we could ignore it. So the next one is rotation about the y-axis. So that's it there. And I'm trying to just rotate there without doing anything else. So you can see that that generates quite a bit of racket head speed. So that needs to go into the mix. And in fact, that is our final ingredient for the topspin forehand. So now we need to put it all together. And also, as we put it together too, we now need to focus on the timing of the movements, because the timing is absolutely critical. So what we do is we've start our backswing there, and our arm starts swinging and our body starts rotating, and we reach a critical point where the ball's about there, and the arm, it just essentially explodes. I mean, everything it can do from there, it does. So in other words, the wrist closes, the elbow closes, and the arm rotates very quickly. All the while you carry on swinging and rotating. Or another way to look at that is that we've got 5 functions or variables that we're interested in. Of those, 3 are fast and 2 are slow. So the 2 that are slow are the arm swinging and the body rotating. So because of that, they start at the start of the shot, and they finish, they carry on, they go right through the shot at a consistent speed, and they finish at the end of the shot. Whereas the 3 fast ones, so closing the wrist, closing the elbow and rotating the arm, they start just before you hit the ball and they finish just after you hit the ball. So putting this all together in a sort of like a slow-mo, which is, it's actually quite hard to do. So you're swinging, rotating, and you're carrying on. Or if I try and make it a little bit more coordinated. And that's the topspin forehand. Now, when I say that that is the topspin forehand, what I really mean is that that is a topspin forehand. In fact, I call it the kitchen sink forehand. And the reason why is because really I've taken everything there is and I've just thrown it at the shot. So everything the arm and the body can do that's of significance is in that shot. But it's probably no surprise that there's quite a few variations in how people hit a topspin forehand. I mean, if you go to your local tennis club, you'll see lots of different styles. I mean, some of them even a little bit weird. But even within the pro circuit, there's quite a few variations in style, and some of those variations are quite prominent. So the kitchen sink forehand that I've shown you, I still think that's probably the dominant style. Like, for instance, it's like that Djokovic and Federer have got topspin forehands which are quite similar to that. But there's, as I said, there's some quite prominent differences. So, for instance, let's even just look at the way that different people use the elbow in their the way they hit a topspin forehand. So, if you remember the kitchen sink forehand, what happens is the arms are swinging and then the ball's about there and the elbow closes suddenly. So we're using that, closing the elbow just at the moment you hit the ball to generate racket head speed. But one type of style of forehand, which is, for instance, Nadal and Tsitsipas hit, they use their elbow quite differently. So when they hit the ball, their arm is straight, and as they hit the ball, the elbow's locked. So they've forehands like that. So sure, the elbow closes, but it closes in the follow through after they've hit the ball. In other words, they're not using it to generate racket head speed. Now, why? I mean, why? To be honest, I don't really get that shot. I mean, you can't argue with with those two guys and the results that they're getting. But one thing I would say that type of forehand, it requires a lot of physicality. So I wouldn't necessarily advise it for club standard players. Now, another style of forehand is the Berrettini, Nick Kyrgios forehand. And once again, they hit with the elbow locked during the shot, but they hit it with it cocked. So that's their shot like that. So sure, their elbow closes, but it closes after they've hit the ball. So at the moment they're hitting the ball, their elbow is cocked and locked. Now, I get this one. So what they're doing is they're using arm rotation to increase racket head speed. So if you remember, like if you rotate like that, you're not doing much. If you cock your wrist, you got racket head speed, then you cock your elbow. And so what you're doing, every time you're doing that, you're increasing the radius of that arc, and therefore you're increasing racket head speed. Another common variation in topspin forehand styles is body rotation. Now, in the kitchen sink forehand and on the pro circuit as well, I've got 180 degrees of body rotation. And that's how most pros hit the ball. I mean, there's some real standouts here. Like if you watch Davidovich Fokina, I mean, that guy is just amazing. Like he just launches himself at a forehand and he has really aggressive, very rapid body rotation. So he's really using that to give him a lot of extra racket head speed. In my mind though, I mean, to hit a shot like him, or even the majority of pros, I mean, you need a huge amount of physicality, you need incredible timing, you need a great deal of fitness. In my mind, yeah, it's not really something that I think that most club players could or should achieve. I mean, I know myself, I probably hit a forehand, I'd probably something like that in terms of body rotation. So I'm probably achieving maybe 90 degrees, maybe even a little bit less. to my mind, that's what I would recommend for most club standard players. So now let's crunch some numbers. What we want to do is we want to work out the racketed speed that each function of the arm and body generates. And to do that, we need to know three things. We need to know the arc, we need to know the radius, and we need to know the time. And so what I mean by that, it's quite simple. So if we take my wrist, for instance, I mean, when I hit a forehand, topspin forehand, my wrist starts about there and it finishes about there. So my wrist goes through around about 90 degrees. So that's my arc. The next thing you want to work out is the radius. So that's easy as well. So if that's where it's pivoting about there. So all I need to do is measure the distance from there to the center of my racket. That's about 500 millimeters. So that's my radius. And the last thing I need is the time, which is the time it takes in the topspin forehand to do that. Now that's not so easy to work out. But what we've done is we've run different forehands through various sort of video software, and we've worked out that you do that in about 0.3 of a second. And then we've gone then to each of the different parts of the body and arm. So we've done the wrist, we've done the elbow, we've done the arm, we've done the arm rotation, and we've done the body rotation. And then we've put it all in an Excel spreadsheet. And you can download that spreadsheet. It's in the conversation box at the bottom of the screen. So that's what I want you to do. If you can download that, and then let's have a look at it. And I think you'll find the results are really interesting. So I'm just looking at it now. So just to describe what we've got here, if you look at the left-hand side of the Excel spreadsheet, in bold it says kitchen sink forehand, which is the forehand we're looking at the moment. So it's got the 5 body functions that we're interested in: wrist, elbow, arm swing, arm rotation, body rotation. So they're in the 5 columns. And then it's got 3 rows, which are the 3 functions we just talked about, as the arc, the radius, and the time. And then to the right of that, you've got 2 rows. So the first row is, and it's a really simple mathematical calculation, but it works out the racketed speed that each of them generates. For instance, the wrist, I see it's a 90-degree arc, 500 mil radius, 0.3 second time, which gives us a racketed speed of 2.6 meters per second. And then it adds all up down the bottom. We get a total racketed speed of 19.8 meters per second, which is the same as 71 kilometers an hour, which is the same as 44 miles an hour. Now the next column along, yes, is I think is really interesting, and that is that it gives the percentage that each of these has in terms of your total racketed speed. And you can see from that the real standout is arm rotation. I mean, it gives you 32% of your racketed speed, which is not a surprise to me, but I mean, it is the most significant factor. The next one is the shoulder swing, 20%. The next one is body rotation, 18%. Then elbow, 17%, and final wrist, 13%. So that's the kitchen sink forehand. And bear in mind, that's, as I said, that's a theoretical forehand. So what I want you to do next with this Excel program is look to the right-hand side on the spreadsheet from the kitchen sink forehand, and you'll see one that's titled Your Forehand. So the idea is that I want you to go in and enter your data for your own variation, your own interpretation of the topspin forehand. I want you to enter it into that spreadsheet, and where you do it is you'll see that 3 rows are highlighted in yellow, and those are the figures there that I want you to go in and enter data from your forehand. And as I said, of those 3 rows, like 2 of them are easy and one of them maybe is not so hard. So the time it takes is might be a little bit hard. So just at the moment, park that and let's just focus on your forehand in terms of what we're calling the arc and the radius. Now to do this, what you need to do is you need to deconstruct your own forehand. So you need to break it down into the components, the 5 components that we've got in our Excel spreadsheet. And the way you do that is you start initially just by thinking about your forehand. Next time you go and have a game, start thinking about how you're hitting it. So just for instance, start with your wrist and just look at your wrist when you start your forehand, and look at it when you close, as you go through the stroke, and where it finally finishes up, where you end your shot. And just go through it as it goes: wrist, elbow, arm swing, arm rotation, body rotation, and just sort of break those three things down in your mind. And then when you get home, just start swinging in the air. So just and you'll find that without a ball there that you have to hit, you can actually get a much clearer idea of what you're doing, and then take those figures or take that analysis that you get from that and then put it into the Excel spreadsheet. So to give you an example, like I'll just hit, this is not my forehand, this is just a forehand that I just see quite often at my tennis club. So that's a forehand like that. And a lot of players that I see hit that forehand. So for instance, if I start with that one, with that forehand that I've just hit there, you'll see the wrist. So these players, they hit with very, very little wrist. So I go into my Excel spreadsheet, and in the area where it says arc, instead of 90, I put in 0, okay? The next one is the elbow. So if you see that one there is elbow, but one thing I'm noticing is a lot of the elbow is in the follow through. In other words, they're hitting the ball about there. We're interested in the elbow's got to be, or any of the functions got to be at the moment the ball's hit. I mean, it's not in the follow through. So go into the spreadsheet, elbow, I mean, they're definitely using a bit of elbow, but not much. So in the arc, yeah, I mean, it's got 110, which is the starting figure. You know, you could maybe put 30 degrees. So shoulder swing, that's how they're generating most of their racketed speed. So that they're probably, so I might start there, they're probably starting there, and they're probably finishing there. So they're probably, I'd say probably certainly over 90 degrees. It's probably about 110, 120 degrees. So I would go in there. So I've got shoulder swings, I've got 165 degrees, put in 120 degrees. Now arm rotation, once again, hitting with very limited arm rotation. So the way to figure out your arm rotation is to look at the plane of your wrist. So that wrist you can see is like that. And you can see it's like that. It's over 45 degrees, but less than 90 degrees. So that arm rotation, say it's 70 degrees. So put in 70 degrees where it says 180, put in 70. And finally, body rotation. Yeah, I mean, the average club standard forehand that I see, they're probably hitting maybe about 30 degrees. So where I say 150 degrees, put in 30 degrees. The next column to look at in the Excel is the radius. Now, most of those figures are all right. I mean, when you think about it, it's just based on the length of an arm and the length of a racket. So there's not going to be much that will change. But one that will change is the radius for arm rotation. And the reason for that is in the kitchen sink forehand, we're achieving a lot of, or a high radius, because we're cocking our wrist and we're cocking our elbow, whereas this club standard forehand that we're looking at now, both of those are a lot straighter. So what I've done on that, I've adjusted the radius. It was 600 millimeter, and I've adjusted it down to 300 millimeter, and I've entered that figure in the Excel. So, and then the final column now that we've got is time. Now, as I mentioned before, time, it is a little bit tricky to work out time. So I've just left it in the too hard basket at the moment, and I haven't changed those figures. I mean, if you want to look more at that, one thing you can do is just is you can video yourself and put it in slow-mo and just work out those figures more accurately. But as I said, at the moment, I've just left it as it is. So let's look at the numbers now. And I think you'll find it is really interesting. So what we've got, just looking at it now, we've got a combined Racketed speed of 5.7 meters per second versus in our kitchen sink forehand with, where we throw everything at it, we've got a figure of 19.8. So in other words, it's less than a third. And if we look at the breakdowns, I mean, some of the breakdowns are really interesting. So for instance, okay, wrist, we've got 0 where we did have 2.6. The next one is elbow. We've got 0.9 where in our kitchen sink, we've got 3.4. In our shoulder swing, we've got 2.9 versus 4.0. And this is probably the biggie, which is arm rotation. We've got 1.2, that's 1.2 meters per second versus 6.3 in the kitchen sink one. And the final one, body rotation, we've got 0.7 versus 3.6. So you can see all of those things, that club standard forehand is just missing out on Racketed speed. And as I said, the final result, 5.7 versus 19.8. So what does this all mean? I think you'll find that this is a powerful tool to improve your forehand. So if you think of the process we've gone through, we've identified the 5 key arm body components that make up the forehand. We've then deconstructed our own forehand into those same 5 components. We've then quantified each of them and then entered them into an Excel spreadsheet and calculated the critical numbers, and then we've compared that with our theoretical gold standard kitchen sink forehand. So I hope you've done that, but that's the Topspin forehand. It's now time to move on, and we're going to move on to what's probably my favorite shot in tennis, and that is the slice backhand.